Good afternoon, everyone. We have started broadcasting, and welcome this afternoon to Interfaith Explorers and our webinar series. For some of you, you may have had a look now at our last one, which was on Ramadan a few weeks ago, and today we're looking at celebrating diversity. So welcome. I'm sure more people will join us. Today is a bit of a different day for schools because some teachers are striking today as part of the NUT. Other people have been in school working hard. So whether you're at home or still in school, you're very welcome. My name's Claire Clinton, and I'm going to be running through this afternoon's webinar with you. Just to let you know what you can see in front of you, hopefully you can see me as well as hear me, and just below underneath me on your computer or iPad, you will find there is a little box where you can type in questions this afternoon. So as I'm leading through this webinar, if you have a question, something you don't understand or something you would like to know a little bit more about, please just use that interactive service that's there and type in your questions. There are people out of shot with me this afternoon who are picking those up and passing them to me, and we will try and deal with as many of those as we can. The other thing to say is to the left of me, there is a SlideShare where you may well have already downloaded and have printed out in front of you today's slides to help us think through celebrating diversity, or you may want to go to that at times and hear me and look at the slideshow rather than watch me as well. Anyway, we'll get going. So Interfaith Explorers, as many of you know, is a resource to help young people in schools to dialogue around interfaith and learn more about different religions and what different people believe. And it seeks to bring a space for that within the curriculum. And some of you I know have been to the seminars that ran around the country, and I hope that means that some of you have gone and tried out some of the resources, many resources on the website, all free for you to use in schools. So we're really grateful to be able to look at these topics, but these are topics we feel will help teachers and support you to be able to use this resource well with children in your school. So it's a resource that's designed to add value to RE and PSHE, and it's promoting ethical thinking and deeper learning. So let's start off with our own deeper learning this afternoon and just look at, first of all, a PowerPoint slide that talks about our objectives this afternoon. And so when we talk about celebrating diversity, we really want to think about how we can make use of SMSC. Teaching is full of jargons, but that's spiritual, moral, social and cultural education, and how we can help pupils develop in all four of those areas. And to think for ourselves why celebrating diversity would be really important for our schools and our settings wherever we are in this country, or even around the world. Same principles would apply. And finally, we want to think about practical steps that you in your school can go and talk with senior leaders and think about steps that you can take that would begin to give more opportunity to celebrating diversity, whether that's diversity that's already in your school community or whether that's looking to diversity outside of your school community and giving a reflection, a place where that can come into and enrich your school's ethos and what it does in its practice. So that leads us to our first question. Why celebrate diversity? And SMSC gives us a very good reason why to. It's been there within the laws of our land, within our education system for a long time. It sort of is at the basis, it's within the Education Reform Act, so it's not something that changes from government to government like we have with the national curriculum, but it's something lower than that. It's embedded within our education system, that schools are there to develop pupils' spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. So first of all, why should we celebrate diversity? Well, one, it's legal. We need to. It's part of what schools are asked to do from government. Secondly, it's come much more into focus over the last 18 months because Ofsted have started to give judgments around it. And so when Ofsted inspectors come to a school, within the areas that they look at, one is leadership and management of the school. And within leadership and management, they are asked to look at the spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of the pupils. And so we're going to think a little bit more about that. But that has meant that SMSC has always been there, but it's a little bit more focused at the moment because it's something that Ofsted look at. In their subject-specific advice around SMSC, they say to look in 4 particular areas for a school in terms of the curriculum. And SMSC is much wider than that, but in terms of the curriculum, they say to have a look at RE, collective worship, music and art. And so you can see within there, as we're looking at RE and this resource supporting RE and PSHE, there's a natural flow there to SMSC and how we're doing that in schools. The other thing is SMSC deals with the whole pupil, not just the academic achievement of a pupil. And in a day and age where those levels, and if we're at secondary, their GCSE results all matter, and point scores matter for schools, SMSC gives us a nice balance to that. It says actually it's about the whole child, the whole young person. It's not just their academic achievement that's the most important thing. Actually, we're interested as a nation in all these things being developed in young people's lives. And I suppose 2 other things from that. If as a school we're taking SMSC seriously, that means that every child is important, because the root of SMSC is saying that every child's development is important, and so it gives us something that includes everybody. Sometimes we have programs in school that are designed for a certain set of pupils, but SMSC is designed for every pupil, and I think that's important. And finally, in the 21st century, we do want to develop pupils who are citizens of the world. And so this resource, Interfaith Explorers, helps children to begin to see a world that's bigger than their classroom. And we know when we receive children into schools, when they're 3 or 4 in nursery and in reception, that we begin to show them a larger world than just their family and their immediate world. And throughout their education, they are becoming citizens. I suppose they already are citizens of the world, but hopefully becoming better informed citizens of the world, ready to make decisions and judgments in informed ways. And so SMSC really helps to keep that in focus, to give an impetus to that at schools. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's anything that's come in at the moment. No, we're fine. We're carrying on. So, when an inspector is coming and looking at SMSC, and as a school, as we begin to think about SMSC, what things do we need to be mindful of? And so what I'd like you to do is to have a look at the next slide, which is about how we see SMSC in schools. And so you'll see the first line of that is, it says pupils' spiritual development is shown by, and it has 4 bullet points underneath that. Now, the first thing I want to say is that when we use the word spiritual in terms of education, it doesn't mean the same as religious. Okay, I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. So spiritual is not equating religious. And so sometimes for some teachers, they can feel a bit nervous about spiritual education. It can be a bit like the breeze. How do you get hold of it? How do you define it? What exactly is it? And Ofsted's advice to inspectors says 4 things for inspectors to look for. And so I thought this would be helpful to share with you, because then that's giving us somebody's definition. There are many definitions of spirituality in terms of education, but here is what Ofsted is passing on to their inspectors. So it says, how are pupils going to, how do we see that they're developing in their spiritual nature? So it says beliefs, religious or otherwise, which inform their perspective on life and their interest in and respect for different people's feelings and values. So how do pupils at your school, how are they finding out explicitly and implicitly about people's beliefs? You can see it says religious or otherwise. And how are those informing their interests, their perspectives on life, their empathy and understanding of people who are different from them, as well as their own values. And I think for all teachers, whether they are religious or not, everyone would understand that the reason we have our belief system is because we value certain things. And because of our beliefs, we value them, and because of our values, it goes back to our beliefs. So there's this relationship that goes round between what we value and what we believe. And nobody is beliefless. Everybody has beliefs, and they are drivers in our lives. And part of education in the UK or in England and Wales, the government is saying it's important that pupils are developing in that they understand that relationship between what they value and how that leads on to their actions, and it's informed by their beliefs. And they don't want them just to think about their own, but think about their own in the relation of all those others that are around them. And so if you're in a school like where I grew up on the Isle of Wight, which was, when I grew up there, was not a multi-faith, multi-religious, multicultural place. It was a very mono place. Most people were sort of white British in my school. There were very other different children. So for a school like that to think about how, you know, when Claire was growing up, how does Claire have that bigger look? How does she find people who are different from her, that will make her think, that will challenge her at times, her views on life, her values on life, why she values the things she does? And I always remember someone saying to me that you don't think you have culture until you come against someone else's. And it's then that you really notice that you have culture. There is a way that you think is the right way for something to happen. And that comes from our upbringing and our families and society around us. And so whether your school setting is very mono-ethnic or whether it is multi-ethnic, both of those settings have to have careful handling of how are we going to make children think about spiritual matters. And a sense of enjoyment and fascination in learning about themselves and others and the world around us, including the intangible, so those big questions. And those big questions aren't just related to RE. Some fantastic questions can go on in every area of the curriculum, whether we're thinking about economic matters, whether we're thinking about ultimate questions of right and wrong and why things happen, but also the intangible in terms of scientific investigation, mathematical equations. They're pretty intangible to some of us, especially me in RE. Okay, so also use of imagination and creativity in their learning. That's part of spiritual education, which is why Ofsted say have a look at music and art, because it's playing into that creativity that's important, and a willingness to reflect. And those of you who know about good RE, it's not only learning about, but it's learning from. And those are really important aspects of good RE. And so again, it's showing in SMSC that reflection is an important part. And again, in the resources that you'll find in Interfaith Explorers, it's giving opportunities for children to reflect. And again, this is building up good development in terms of spiritual education. Okay, so what does Ofsted say to their inspectors in terms of moral development? Okay, how can we see that in our school? An ability for children to recognise difference between right and wrong, and their readiness to apply this understanding to their own lives. And I think most of us as teachers will know from time to time, pupils can be very good at saying what the right thing to do is, but that not actually leading on in their lives. I suppose it's no different from us as adults. But that there are places in the curriculum where that can be taken seriously, that can be challenged, and children are made and young people are made to think about right and wrong and choices and consequences, which brings us on to the next bullet point of those choices. And that young people need to understand, children need to understand consequences. Our legal system is set up on that. So if nothing else, to be a good citizen here, you need to understand the idea of consequences. Also, pupils' moral development is shown through their interest to investigate, offering reasoned views about moral and ethical issues. Some of you may have heard of philosophy for children, and in some schools that's a very big thing, and in other schools still it's I suppose something that's not known so well. And I found my own training in philosophy for children really useful way to get children to open up, to investigate big questions, to think and reason about arguments, and not just to be able to articulate their arguments, but actually for others to be quite critical with what makes a good argument, what doesn't make a good argument, because children need those skills in the 21st century to be able to operate as a citizen of the world, I think, effectively. So why am I saying those to you? Because I think it would be good for you maybe to talk at some point with other colleagues from your school and to think through, how are there opportunities for these things? How are we doing these things within our school? Because what I can say is, if you can find examples, and as I've gone through them, you're thinking of examples, then actually you have got opportunities for SMSC development for your pupils. I was listening to an Ofsted inspector on Monday, who leads inspections around the country, and she was saying that outstanding is good practice over time. And so I would like to encourage you to think about that good practice, that as schools do that consistently over time, that leads to that outstanding judgment. Okay, so we've done S&M. Let's go on to the SC. So social development. How are we going to ensure that pupils are developing socially in our schools so that they can celebrate diversity? Well, that they can be in a different form or a different range of contexts, whether they're in big groups or small groups, whether they're mixing across phases and year groups, or whether they're working with their peers. If they can work with people who are of a different religion, a different ethnic, a different socio-economic, that boys and girls can work together. That's something that I've heard Ofsted looking at recently. You know, that when a teacher asks for mixed groups, if there's a in the room, that's not a good sign. There needs to be that ease between pupils to work with whoever. They're open, they're socially developed, that they can do that. And that involves schools sometimes going outside, learning outside the classroom, maybe mixing with other schools. Lots of schools use the British Council to pair up with schools internationally, and also schools often pair up with a school in this country in a different place. I was in a school yesterday and in Canning Town, and they have a partner school in Essex, in a very rural part of Essex. And actually both of those schools are gaining from that relationship, that their pupils are seeing difference. A willingness to participate in those different social settings, cooperating well, able to resolve conflicts effectively. A lot of schools talk about how P4C, apart from in the classroom helping, has helped pupils really to resolve issues at break time and lunch times, because they now have language that they can use to say what they're happy with and what they're not happy with, rather than having to push or hit or do something that maybe as a school we wouldn't want them to be doing to one another. Okay, interest in other communities and societies, and sort of other socio economic groups nationally, locally and internationally. And again, Interfaith Explorers is helping you to provide some of those resources, and a good reason, again, to be using and looking into the resource. Okay, so the final part of SMSC is how can we see that through cultural development? And that's what schools in multi-ethnic settings find very easy to do because it's already there in the school itself. But for those of you in more rural settings, that sometimes can be difficult. It involves a lot more planning and thought because things are not on the doorstep, not in the community, right where you live. And it's an important thing that these children are given those opportunities, but you have to think how you can hit many things at the same time. So I can remember when I was in a more rural part of Essex, we used to do all sorts of things on trips out, not just the RE. We would be trying to link it with geography and history and doing a bit of English in there, so that we were hitting lots of areas of the curriculum to do some of this cultural development, that just not one area, but to try and sort of make our trips sort of zing in lots of different ways because of the effort to get pupils out and somewhere different. So there is a lot of different cultures that have influenced our nation, our British nation, and there's some fascinating resources around that. I was at last year the British Museum, and it's still, I think, online. There are things about Islam and the sort of what that's given our country in terms from medieval times onwards. You find lots of those resources that have come into our influences as to why we are the nation we are at the moment. But cultural development for pupils is that examples of a school. The inspectors would look for the sporting, the music, the mathematical, the technological, science, all those different opportunities that happen maybe through clubs, maybe through special events, maybe through festivals. And what they're looking for is pupils, again, who are excited and open to get involved in those and have a look for those and to understand more about those, that's really important. So having given you that background of what Ofsted says it's looking at when it looks at SMSC, and justifying why we want to celebrate diversity to help pupils become citizens of the world, where do we start? Okay, and the next few slides have a bit of data shown in different ways. And I often say to schools here in Newham, where I am based, that to start off with looking where you are. And so you'll see on the next slide, it says, first of all, know the religious breakdown of your school or of your borough, where you are in the country. And you'll see a very small graph there. But what I did for teachers this year in the RE network meetings that I run is I just did that breakdown. I got it off the government census website, so it's not something I've produced, it's something that the government's produced, where you can go into your borough statistics around religion and you can then compare that to other places. So you'll see in this particular graph, I compare Newham to London, but I haven't had to put any of the figures in. I can get that from what the government's already done. And it just sometimes, I'm a visual learner, some of you will be like me, and therefore for me to see a visual of difference, it makes better sense. And of course that's true for children as well. So if you look at that, I wonder, what are the differences that you can see between Newham and London? I'm going to give you a moment to think, and I'm going to have a bit of water. Okay, I realise it's a bit small for some of you, but what I think is quite interesting is the difference between the number of Muslims in Newham and the number of Muslims in London. The Christians in Newham and the Christians in London. And the big one at the bottom there that's quite different as well is the number of people with no religion, which is the blue at the very bottom, and the people with no religion in London. So you can see in Newham that's less than half that figure, that percentage. There's very few people in Newham that have no religion, whereas it's a much larger part of the figures in London. The Christian, less in Newham, more in London, and you'll see for the Muslims, which is sort of like the dark grey, bluey bit, is about 3 times bigger, nearly 4 times bigger in Newham than it is in London. And as teachers, I think it's important for us to be able to start and know that cultural, that ethnic, as well as that religious breakdown. Now, where do you find that in your school? Well, when the children first come to your school, they fill in details, or the parents fill in the details. They're a bit small to fill them in nursery and reception. But often nothing is done with the religious data. But we are asked questions as parents as to which group we would fit into or none. And so most in the offices somewhere, along with that ethnic breakdown of your school, will also be a religious breakdown of your school. And then you compare your school to your borough or to your bigger area, like for us in Newham. And if you look on to the next slide, I wanted to give you something that maybe would be useful back in your school, because unless you're here today from Newham, that's really not that useful. But the next slide hopefully will be. And you'll see on the next slide, I bought a book which was called If the World Was a Village and made up of 100 people. It's a PSHE book, and it says what language would those 100 people speak. And one of the pages looked at what religion would those people be. And so you can see here that 33 of those 100 people would be Christian and 23 of them would be Muslim. And to help the children in my school, we did this 100 people, and divided them up. So you'll see a little bit of that as well. That's why there's all those people with the different colours around them, so the children could see that visually. If the world was 100 people, what would it look like? And if you look to the next page on, you will see then what I've done just simply in Excel is I've put in the statistics from the 2011 census for England and Wales and just shown that as a pie chart. Okay, and so we can see in there nearly 60% are saying they're Christian. They've got a Christian background, a Christian heritage. Doesn't mean that they'd be going to church. We know that 6.5% of the population roughly go to church each week in England and Wales. So nothing, 59.11% of the population, that was like millions of people going to church, and that's not the case. But in people's background, that often means that if they were getting married, they'd like to get married in a church. If they had a baby, maybe they'd want that baby christened or dedicated. On the point of death, they would want a funeral, and maybe that based in a church. So their spiritual home, that's where they feel. It doesn't mean in any of these categories, whether they're saying that they're Muslim or Hindu. In every religion, there is a wide range of adherence and a wide range of interpretation of how you live out that faith. And so that would be true of all these statistics, of all these people. But it gives us a picture. And if you look to the following slide, what I've done is I've taken that world picture, the one with the people with the different colours around it, 2 slides ago, and put it next to the one on the page we've just been looking at. And you'd be able to see fairly easily there that there's a huge difference between in the world and England. So England and Wales, you can see there's a huge many more Christians than percentage-wise than in the world. You would see that the next one, the red one, for the world, that's Muslim people. For England and Wales, the next largest one was people of no religion. And actually that's quite similar. But if you're wanting to compare the Muslim one from the world to our country, on the world you look at the red one, and on the one for our country it's the purple, and you'll see it's a much smaller slice. So there's a big difference between Muslims in the world compared to Muslims in our country. And as we said in the last webinar, on that British 2011 census, 4.8% of the population were Muslim, which is why it's such a small part of that pie chart. Okay, why am I showing you this? Well, I'm showing you this because I think it's interesting for children and young people to be able to see what's similar and different about where they live to the world, where they live, and how that impacts. Okay, I'm going to give you a moment now just to think about how could you use that information in your school? How would that help to celebrate diversity? I'm just reading some questions while you're thinking. Okay. Now, we've had a few questions come in, so thank you very much for those. And hopefully the bit that we go on to now will help answer some of those. So that's really good. And thank you so much for sending in those questions, because it's really nice. So one of the questions we've got in is, it says, I teach in a school where there isn't the degree of diversity that sort of I have down here in Newham. So how do I deal with parents who don't want me to teach about this kind of diversity? And parental fears is a big problem, full stop, wherever we are. And whether we're in a very diverse school or where this school sounds that doesn't have so much diversity, parents are often scared of the unknown, the different. And this means that, yes, we do need to handle it with a degree of sensitivity. We need to make it feel safe for those parents, and that is important. I also think that if there are ways of celebrating looking at that, so often Friday mornings and parents come in and we have the celebration assembly, and again in the school where I have my offices, children are celebrating about something they've learnt about, and the school can be quite careful there to make sure where it's new learning about different cultures and things, that that's set in an appropriate context, so that if the children are very positive about what they've been learning and those objectives are very clear, then parents can feel more relieved. Research by the Joseph Rowntree Trust shows that where parents do not have particularly strong beliefs in a particular religious tradition, they're often quite concerned about children learning about difference. Where parents have very thought through religious beliefs, often they're not so concerned about children learning about difference, because they feel as a family they're owning very strongly those centred beliefs. So I think it's a little bit about thinking about what the parents are like, looking for easy wins, ways that you can do something as a school that celebrates it. Also finding your person, whether there's someone on governors or whether there's a TA or whether there's a particular parent through the PTA or the Parents Association who is a little bit more open in your setting, and whether you can use those almost as an advocate by taking them on something, a trip, or them being part of a project, and they then spread the good news in the playground. I know many schools have looked at who are the parents who are going to change practice, who are the parents who are going to improve what we're doing. So maybe think about that in the school you are at. I also think you make parents feel more secure where they're clear how you already recognise their traditions and their culture. And so have a look in your school. So for instance, if you're in a very white British area, make sure that you have got ways that you are celebrating key Christian festivals, like Christmas and Easter. So don't go for a winter festival, go for a Christmas festival. Other parents of other religions will have no problem with that. Don't ask necessarily a Muslim child to become the part of Mary or Gabriel, as they're named characters in the Quran, and some Muslim parents will not want their children representing characters that are named in the Quran. Others won't mind as their children, but just think about that. Interfaith Explorers, we've got a few questions about Interfaith Explorers, and would like to say that you would find, as you go in and through that result, that resources, you will find that it has everything that you need in terms of delivering good SMSC. So yeah, the 6-week program will do that. What it's not going to provide is everything that your school needs to be doing in terms of SMSC, but it would make a really positive contribution to that. And again, I think sort of this thing of developing pupils socially is so important. And again, I think Interfaith Explorers ask pupils to do that. And sometimes having those links with another school just brings it to another dimension and can help you with that. Okay, so going on to what can we do then to celebrate diversity? And I've got a long list on the next PowerPoint slide, but I wanted to try and get it on one rather than going over to two. So knowing your school values. Lots of schools have a statement of their beliefs and their main strapline. So make sure that's tied in, because actually that should be something that then shows how SMSC can be developed, how it celebrates diversity. Have a think about your role models within your school. How have you got people from different socio-economic groups, different cultural groups, different religious groups, and none role modelling in different ways, so that you don't have every teacher being one sort of person, but that they're very, very different. Obvious things like displays, and what visuals you've got around your curriculum being broad and balanced. Again, I think Ofsted are going to bring in something soon where there will be a judgment around a broad and balanced curriculum. So SMSC is helping with that, so that's good news. Where there is discrimination, where that happens in playgrounds, where it happens in the classroom, good SMSC, good celebrating diversity has things in place for you as a teacher to help you know what to do next. You might not know on your own, but to be able to know where to go, to ask the questions, and particularly at the start of your career, what somebody else would do. I think that was one of the most helpful things for me when I started. My dad, who'd been a PE and a physics teacher in secondary, said to me, Claire, find 3 teachers that you think are good teachers and go to them with your questions. Keep going and asking, what would they do? Watch how they discipline, watch how they deal with situations. And I'm very grateful to those 3 people in my life 25 years ago when I started as a teacher, who really helped me to find my feet. So don't feel you're on your own. Go and see what other people do. And don't allow discrimination. You know, do challenge it. Visits and clubs. We've just had a Visit a Place of Worship celebration here, where children go out and visit different places. Faith leaders come into school to talk about their faith. And sometimes schools use those people for assemblies as well. So there's learning mentors, there's learning outside the classroom, festivals, all sorts of ways that we can have throughout the year, these points where we can celebrate diversity as a school. Okay, so just going finally to some more questions that have come in. Have you got any ideas about good starting points on the subject of diversity, maybe themes? Well, I do. And I think often looking at stories is a great way to start. So you could take very well-known stories from different religions, or you could take a story from a secular setting. So, for instance, I've used 5 Minutes Peace, which is a lovely little book that I used to read to my children when they were small and under 5, and involves a mum who's an elephant who's trying to get 5 minutes peace and actually never gets 5 minutes peace. Everybody comes at her every which way she goes, even when she's in the bathroom. You know, that's what she's looking for, just 5 minutes peace. And I've used that with year 5s and year 6s to talk about what is the importance of peace. So ask them what the secret message is of the story. So those stories you can read and see quite quickly because they're written for younger children. So you can use them with older children, get them to come up with the secret message within the story. Choose one of those secret messages then to discuss and to think about ideas about. And so I've had some brilliant discussions with the children looking at where is the peace point in their life, and do they have any peaceful places, and what is the benefit of peace to their life. Do we all need 5 minutes peace? And what happens to us as individuals, to our school community or to our society where we don't have peace? And so start with 5 minutes peace, but there's many other good stories. And what I could do is I could put on the website some examples of some themes and some storybooks that would get you going on that. And I can pass those to the web people today. So I'll do that before I go, because you probably don't want a list now of books and ISBNs, but I've got them on some bits of paper that I can pass over. So I hope that helps. Right, I think we're getting down to our last bit of time. And I just wanted to check. No, nothing more's come in. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. I hope it's helped you to start thinking about celebrating diversity, how your school can do that more. If you haven't got that relationship with another school around the country and you're interested in that, then you know, do contact us here at Interfaith Explorers. It may be that there's something that we can link up between schools who've been using this resource in different ways so that you're benefiting one another and making those links. And if you do have any more questions, then do send those to Roxana, who looks after the Interfaith Explorers charity and the work that's done here. So thank you very much for staying with me today. It's been brilliant to have some of you along with me. And just to say that our next webinar is on, I'm just looking, the 25th of September. Oh yes, at 4 o'clock. And it's going to be on handling interfaith conversations amongst pupils. Handling interfaith conversations amongst pupils. So going on from today, we've looked at SMSC, so we want to get into, so okay, how as practitioners do we do that better? All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you again in September. Bye. Have a good summer.